How many of you are old enough to remember the Green Bay Packer player Jerry Kramer? A few of you, okay. He played for the Green Bay Packers during their glory years, 58 to 68, when they kind of dominated the National Football League. He was a pretty fair player. But when he retired, he wrote a book called Instant Replay, in which he shared a lot of intimate things. But one of the things that he shared was his own sense of mortality, that is, his own sense of his limited humanness. This is what he wrote. I think a lot about death these days, which is funny too, because I've never been healthier. I've had only one serious illness in the past 10 years, only one near-death experience. I haven't broken a bone, not even a finger, since I stopped playing football 16 years ago. My weight's not bad, about 240, 20 pounds less than when I stopped playing. Most of the time I feel really good. And yet now more than ever, I sense that I'm mortal. A year ago I lost my father to cancer, and I don't think I'll ever get over his death. In some ways, I think it was more difficult for the family than it was for him. Dad was a very religious man, and he was ready to go. He had his faith, and he said he was locked in the arms of the Lord. Sometimes I wish I had that kind of faith, but I don't. I just have questions. That's interesting. His father's death was harder on the family than it was on his father. Well, now, why? Because, as he said, Dad was a very religious man, and he was ready to go. He had his faith, and he said he was locked in the arms of the Lord. I just have questions, Jerry Kramer wrote. Well, you just heard. Jesus said, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." So often when we look at this section of the Gospel according to John, and this is the section that's read every year the Sunday after Easter. But whenever we look at this section of John, we concentrate on Thomas's doubts, and we say, hey, I can identify with that guy. But we miss the punchline. We miss the important part. We miss the words of Jesus to Thomas. Have you believed because you've seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. Now, we're not talking about the smugly self-righteous who spout off answers to questions that nobody's asking. We're talking about people who have come to grips with their doubts in an honest and upfront way, and they've made a commitment of themselves to the will of God, to trust and to care in the love of God. Now, those folks are the ones who are the blessed of the earth, and generally they are healthier and happier and more effective in relating to others than the doubters or the cynics. Now, there's real power in believing, more power than the unbeliever or the cynic could ever begin to know. And part of that power is the power of vision. And, you know, for if seeing is believing, then the other side of the equation is true as well. Believing is seeing. Seeing possibilities. Seeing the promises of God in life. Now, I'm not naive. I know we all have our doubts. We all do. Woody Allen, great philosopher, said that faith would be a lot easier if God would show himself by depositing $1 million in a Swiss bank account in his name. That's philosophy, isn't it? Milo Frank, you may not be familiar with the name, wrote a little book called How to Get Your Message Across in 30 Seconds or Less. It took him 200 pages to do that. But he writes about this story in that little book. Listen to this. True story. My friend Charlie was in love with a charming young woman named Ava. She was in love with Charlie, but so far he had been unable to persuade her to marry him. Then one day he invited her to lunch. They drove to the Los Angeles Coliseum, the largest sports arena on the West Coast, the home of the 1984 Olympics. In the center of the playing field were placed a small table and 2 chairs. A maitre d' showed them to the table, a captain seated them, and a waiter waited behind each chair. Now, apart from this small oasis, the Coliseum was empty. Thousands of empty seats stared down at Charlie and Ava. The table was elegantly set with spode china, crystal, and silver. Caviar and champagne were served, then a souffle and salad with more champagne. And as they were waiting for dessert, Charlie directed Ava's attention to the huge electronic scoreboard at the far end of the field. And at a prearranged signal, he raised his glass, and on the board flashed the words, "Darling Ava, will you marry me?" What do you think she said?
Yes.
Yes. Now, why can't God do something like that for us? It would be so easy. A comet streaking across the sky through the dark night with its tail skywriting, "I love you, signed God." Now, of course, when the media got hold of that, they explained it away as a natural phenomenon. But we'd know better, wouldn't we? Why doesn't God do something spectacular like that? You know, in asking such a question, we are admitting that there is a part of us that still says with Thomas, "Unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, I will not believe." We all long for something sure. But my friends in Egypt, that's one gift that God has not given us yet. And I think God has his reasons. If his goal is to raise up mature children to spend eternity with him, he has to be careful that we have room to grow to maturity. If a child knows that his father will always be there to solve every problem, to resolve every crisis, to comfort every sorrow, the child will never develop self-reliance, will never grow to maturity. You see, in life, there comes that moment when freedom becomes choice. And a Swiss bank account, lit up scoreboard, a comet in the sky isn't going to be the answer.